we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Culling Sacred Cows. This is my co-host, Steven Stutz.
What's up, guys?
I'm Matt Line. For all of you who can't read the things beneath our names.
Yes, for our illiterate viewers, I'm sure we have a...
Don't ask how I was able to read it. I never got out of preschool, so... I'm just trusting that my name's there.
Well, let's see. We like this.
All right, time to see if this stream is actually.
Yep, it's up, but I think I'm the only one watching.
Okay. All right. Well, since you're the only one watching, we can chew the cud for a little bit.
Did you like it?
Did I?
Was that you? Someone else liked it just now.
I did not.
Let me make sure I'm getting this right.
I did not. I'm still in the process of signing into the account, so I can go and change all the different.
Interesting. I'm going to advertise the stream.
Oh, nice.
In the Discord group. Now there's 2 people. Cool.
Oh, great.
So, okay.
I'm gonna have to go change a few things. Like the name of the stream is gonna.
Oh yeah, we need to.
Yep, I'm getting all the articles and stuff like that, or at least all the stuff we found so far, putting it in the description for them.
Awesome.
All right, has it updated yet?
Let's try. Says checkout description for links and timestamps. That part's updated, but it's not fully updated.
Meaning?
It only says checkout description for links and timestamps.
And then it doesn't have any of the other stuff yet underneath it. So even if you expand it, it doesn't show up anything. It doesn't show anything.
Right. No, no.
Okay, good.
It just appeared.
Okay, good. Right, well, there we are.
All right.
I see there are 2 people watching. So hello to whoever else is here besides Steven.
Yep. Oh, 3 now.
All right.
Cool. I think we can get started then. Let's see.
Excellent. So the first thing on our list was the piece about campus insanity hitting high school as teachers protest Eurocentric imperialism of history classes.
Oh yeah.
So we'll switch over to our article viewing mode as we clear away all the inappropriate layers, and here we go. Would you like to take this one? You have the article in front of you?
Yeah. Let me just read it.
All right.
Alrighty, so campus insanity hits high school as teachers protest Eurocentric imperialism of history classes. It may not be comfortable for parents to realize that their kids' teachers are molded by an almost entirely left-wing credentialing cartel, but it's been happening for decades and is now overly politicizing K-12 history classes. This week, high school teachers protested the College Board's changes to its advanced placement world history classes, which thousands of high schools teach across the country every year. Here's a quote. You cannot tell me, my black and brown students, that their history is not going to be tested, and then assume that that's not going to matter. Right. The people in power in our country already are telling those same students that their history, that their present, that their future doesn't matter. And by you making this decision, you are going along with that. Teacher Amanda Amaro told College Board Senior Vice President Trevor Packer at a conference this week. Rather than pointing out to Amaro that it's historically illiterate, not to mention possibly racist, to assume you know a person's ancestry simply by looking at his or her skin color, Packer told her other parts of the curriculum would fit in her demands. The AP curricula changes teachers object are primarily simply dividing world history into two classes, because as one might reasonably imagine, it's difficult to thoroughly cover the history of the entire world in a single class. God, sorry for laughing here. College Board frequently gets complaints about cramming too much into its courses. And another quote. There are so many students who are being told they don't matter outside of the classroom. Really, a message that this would be sending is that their histories don't matter. High school junior Noah Mitchell told Politico. Mitchell is presumably one of Amaro's former students, since they're from the same town, participated in AP World History classes at the same time, and are quoted in the same article. Although the reporter does not disclose the probable fact. Wonder why. Apparently, Mitchell's AP World History class did not teach him the obvious reality that can be defined on a fabricated dark light skin color binary as brown can easily share just about no history at all. As far as I know, I have zero family ties to Scandinavia despite being white. If someone told me I was being denied hearing about my own history because I've never taken a Scandinavian history class, I'd look at him like the blockhead he is, and do whatever was in my power to make sure he never got near any curriculum committee. Mongols and American Indians have very different histories, but as a person who only sees superficial exterior features, they might look similar. Apparently that's enough to tick off the approved box for learning their history instead of history of politically disfavored outward appearances. The pertinent thing, however, is not grouping people by appearances, but by shared experiences, events, and ideas over time. That is partly why what the study of history is. It is not an exercise in identity politics. It cannot be. People do not fit these fake, stupid boxes that somehow still seem to imbue people with enough pomposity to tell the rest of us to quaver before their stark, raving ignorance. Another quote. As a person of color who was in AP World History this past year, all you're doing means so much to me. Throughout elementary and middle school, the only times I learned about my people was starting in slavery, then with the civil rights movements, and apartheid. That's it, commented Zaria Roller on a YouTube video of Amaro's remarks. AP World meant so much to me because I got to learn about the great empires that existed in Africa and Asia before colonization destroyed them. Apparently, Mitchell and Roller's AP World History classes did not teach them that if neurotically bean counting skin color and body features is an activity one must compulsively undertake despite its racist undertones. Plenty of brown and black people have long histories in Europe and the Americas. Ever heard of the Moors, the Incas, the Ottoman Empire? So just stop right now, because until you can demonstrate you know a blazing single thing, you most certainly have no license to tell other people what we ought to think. Opining on history curricula should require knowing at least a little history, and folks who say patently ignorant things like this immediately disqualify themselves. It's idiotic to decide who is important to study based on what their skin and hair looks like, rather than our available knowledge about their civilization and their effects on the world and the worlds that came after it, especially our own. In fact, as research from social psychologist Jonathan Haidt and others has shown, using race as an organizing category for understanding the world actually increases racism. So curricula along the lines of what this teacher wants will make the world worse for her black and brown students and everybody. Perhaps it's to paper over her embarrassing lack of knowledge of both history and social science that Amaro had to fall back on grievance stalking pretext to assert authority. There's a woman who wants to speak first, thank you, she said to open her remarks at the teacher forum. This prompted audience applause, as did many of her other power plays. Yes, students have set up a supportive petition on change.org that has several thousand signatures. Such faculty and student support of these objectively terrible ideas is worrisome. Later, she said to Packer, I would love to know how many black and brown teachers are on making these decisions about AP curriculum. Imply that their skin color rather than say pertinent and transcendent criteria such as search for truth, a well-informed opinion about professional judgment, or the needs to cultivate thoughtful citizens should determine ideas and decisions. Now, let's be clear. College Board is in the middle of revamping all of its history curricula. American history and European history were updated before world history came up to the dock. And independent evaluators found the changes were slanted the curriculum uniformly to the left. Therefore, it is almost a certainty that the revamp to this world history curriculum will do the same. But boilerplate anti-American, anti-West leftism does not placate identitarians like Del Amaro and those clapping and hollering her on this conference for AP teachers. They want more, and these are the people teaching your kids and your kids' peers. Parents and taxpayers who do not consistently and very noticeably respond with a clear demand that their children and tax dollars not be held hostage to destructive politics like these are abdicating their responsibilities to their kids and the citizens who are and the country. Citizens who are unwilling to see that their children learn to seek truth, love what is good about their heritage, constructive ways to examine and respond to social evils, and be wary of people selling tribalism. A country full of citizens like that is choosing to destroy itself. That would be a sickening shame and a horrific loss for the world, because despite of its serious failures, the United States has been and still is the best place to try and make a life on our weary, poor, violence-stricken earth. Del Amaro closes her remarks with a clear statement that at least folks like her understand what's at stake in curriculum wars like these. Looking ahead 10 years, these kids are voting. Like, how are we supposed to stop Islamophobia if we can't teach Islam because it's not on the test? In response, Packer suggests agreeing to disagree. I will not agree to disagree, Del Amaro replies. I will keep fighting on this. All right, that's the end.
Did you just have sugar?
Yes.
Okay.
I need glasses, so I was in this, yeah. So I was really struggling to read.
Well, you were reading really, 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 really fast.
Oh, was I? Okay.
Oh yeah, you were reading really fast. I was thinking, was whatever you were eating there containing sugar, because you were more hyped up than I've seen you ever on stream before.
Yeah, no. Yeah, chocolate chip cookie dough. Let's see. Does it have... No. I didn't even realize I was so fast. Yeah, my bad.
Yeah. The entire...
I was like, I don't usually trip over my words. What's going on? I did realize that.
Sugar high.
Yeah.
Sugar rush. So yeah, anyhow, with this whole scenario being what it is, it's interesting that people would decide to throw a hissy fit over Eurocentric imperialism. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, classes are, supposed to teach relevant information to the students. Now, certainly, teaching all about every single different culture is a little difficult, as the article seems. You can't do that in a single class.
And attempting to do that, you're going to mess up, because you're going to end up basically not being able to... I mean, you just can't summarize culture like that, right? So if you're going that fast, you're essentially going to have to gloss over probably important things, and everyone's just going to get this watered down sort of... Yeah, it's basically just watered down education of different cultures, and then they will not be able to basically put any weight to each. They'll have discrete pieces of information, a bunch of different cultures in their head, but they won't put weight. They won't be able to connect it together. They won't be able to know what caused what, etc. They'll just have a bunch of basically rote memorized discrete pieces in their head, and really no idea how they fit together and stuff like that.
Ha! I'm reading the chat. It's a little later.
Yeah,
Philip Christensen, take a breather, dude.
I did not. I promise. I did not realize I was going fast.
You were racing, man, and you're still. I'm guessing your mind is still racing at this point.
Maybe, I don't know. I am. I guess I did just have like 2 things with sugar in them. I was extremely tired before the stream, so I wanted to like eat
Hype
something
yourself
to
up.
wake up.
Ah, yeah.
And I didn't
definitely work.
have much food available. So I just had like yogurt and stuff. So I just,
I'm wondering a bit about this whole Well, how how long does an AP course give you per day to actually be in class?
About 50 minutes to an hour.
Okay,
I'd say 45 minutes to an hour. I don't know, like.
So basically,
my school was
max of like 5 hours a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't go through especially not in the way that people lecture in schools. You can't get through that much in that time.
School, what? You're in school 180 days, so that's 36 weeks. So that, but that's just 180 hours of 180 hours to get through the world's history.
Yeah.
So
you lump it all the way up. It's a little over a month.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little over a month to get through a history course. Now, I'll bet you if you got all the students to study nothing but history for a month and to stay on task with that one thing until they completed an entire course, you'd be able to get an awful lot more information because you wouldn't be constantly, okay, we have to split it into this hour block. We are done. We need to somehow turn this into one cohesive unit and then move on to tomorrow's cohesive unit and so on.
Oh, yeah.
If it were somehow organized so that, you get a bunch of kids together that actually want to learn history, and then you just explore, ask questions, and so on. I mean, if you think, okay, so how much homework would they give? About half an hour to 2 hours, I'm guessing, for an AP history class.
Maybe something like that.
So let's say that if you really wanted to nail it, you give like a 3-month block, and say in that 3-month block, we're going to try to hit at many different levels of depth. Say Western history, Eastern history, Middle Eastern history, and say we'll go back, I don't know, 6,000-7,000 years, or 14,000 years, or whatever. But you have to pick the scope of the class, and then apparently, in addition to picking the scope of the class, you need to figure out how to keep people from throwing a hissy fit.
Yeah, good luck.
I mean, I don't look like it, but my ancestry is from all over the Western world. I don't have any Eastern ancestry that I'm aware of, but you can go through all of Europe and all through the U.S. before it was actually the U.S., and I got all of it. And frankly, I don't particularly care. In as much as I care about just, okay, what are the values that, how did society as it is today come to be, and what are some of the, if we're doing a big picture thing, then what are some of the big picture pitfalls and possibilities that both our ancestors and the ancestors of other people wound up having to deal with in terms of their contributions to history. And, of course, those with more relevant cultural elements to what it is that we're doing today give us more to learn from. In that we have to kind of function within the environment that we're in, and then we can't disproportionately go and say, okay, we're going to go and dig on this one very, very, very specific circumstance with this one very, very, very specific group of people, wherever they may be in the world. Because the title of the class is World History.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, if you were to conduct a class where you were to just, perhaps, say for the first few weeks, just outsource, and I would actually kind of almost be okay with group projects in this thing if you're not actually giving them grades. But outsource to certain people, or just to each individual in the classroom. Okay, you're going to study this, you're going to study that, you're going to study this, you're going to study that. And we're going to work on both your ability to hone in on what's important, to analyze cause and effect, and on your ability to present and teach other people this stuff. And so the teacher could then take a backseat role and give the students opportunities to go into the role of learner via books, learner via listening, and teacher via presenting, and teacher via kind of guiding the conversation and ultimately turning the classroom into some sort of an organism that actually helps people learn history. But you can't do that with the structure of school today, because you can't have you can't conduct it like an academy. You can't conduct it like an intelligent conversation amongst many people that have something to add. Just because the entire environment, having all the tables facing one direction, having the whole school attitude, the whole bells ringing every hour, or 45, 50 minutes, whatever it might be.
Oh yeah.
All of that just completely eats into the actual learning process. I contend that if the learning process itself were fixed, the class would be able to include an awful lot more information without becoming overwhelming for the students.
Oh yeah. And I mean, and also, like, if I think about how history classes were structured in my school, like, it's literally just the teacher going over notes and making you copy them down. And to me, that's just a huge waste of time. Like, if there's notes, there's notes. Make sure they learn it, but you need to talk. You need to spend time explaining what's going on. Not, okay, just copy this all down as I recite what to copy to you. Like, that's just a ridiculous waste of time.
Or write down this PowerPoint presentation that I am reading to you.
Yeah, right.
It's like, okay, first off, that's a gigantic insult. It's like, if you have a PowerPoint presentation with a whole bunch of words on it, and all you ever do is read the exact words, that is an insult to your watcher.
That's why I could never take notes in class. I was like, well, this makes sense. We're all even right. So then I just scribbled down some words, right? Like, and then I would get points docked by teachers who care about that sort of thing. They're like, your notes are terrible. It's like, well,
you mean you got graded on your notes?
In certain classes before there have been like, you have to turn your notes in and stuff like that.
What kind of horse crap is that?
It's very smelly horse crap.
Man, in that case, I would have gotten zeros because I just don't take notes.
Yeah, I didn't either. Most classes.
But when you had to,
I only did it when it was mandatory. Yeah, I scribbled some shit down, but yeah, no.
Yeah, engaging with the material is way more important than necessarily writing something down. Now, if writing something down helps you, then sure.
Then do it, but don't make everyone do it.
Exactly. If someone else responds better by asking questions during class and trying to get a deeper understanding, making connections in between all the different subjects to see how this one piece fits into the world, that makes this one piece that we're studying an awful lot more tangible and real and easy to grasp if we have strings going every which way holding it in space. Some people need that.
Web instead of a bunch of filing cabinets.
Yeah. I mean, or at least if you're going to have a bunch of filing cabinets, let there be footnotes. And addresses to all the different other drawers. But still, it's a lot easier, I think, to take an extra fishing line and go and pull it from place to place to hold everything into the web.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The web can be malleable, too.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I always hated history in school. If I'm thinking, and I think history's cool. It's not something I'm like necessarily studying on my own. I'm more interested in starting with philosophy and like maybe political philosophers. But yeah, I mean, if they couldn't make it more dry if they tried to. Just this horrible like standard technique they use of, okay, copy down the notes, okay, blah 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 blah, like memorize a bunch of discrete pieces of information, memorize dates, blah blah, like Like it's just horse crap, and it doesn't help that like history teachers are notoriously like stupid.
Well, not all of them are, but not all of them are. I'm actually aware of. I'm aware of a few really, really good ones.
For sure.
But by and large, history teachers give you the list of names and dates. They memorize this and have no idea of their significance whatsoever.
Oh yeah, and there are a lot of times like. Half our history department was like football coaches or like softball coaches or whatever. Like they're just, okay, what class can I teach without actually learning stuff? So yeah, that was sort of how it went.
Yeah.
And
which actually
is well in history.
Is a pretty interesting segue into our next thing, which was in accordance with your requests. Are people with very high IQs generally happy? And then the myth of the 30 IQ point communication range.
Oh yeah. All right. Do you want me to read it? I'll try to.
Hang tight. I'm just going to check and make sure that. I may wind up having to change a few of the dimensions in order to have everything fit appropriately, but we can definitely read Susanna's answer.
All right, so I'll read it. Let's see. Hopefully I can see better now.
Just slow yourself down a bit, too.
All right.
Enunciate.
Okie dokie. I will give my best shot. Let's say high IQ is a blessing which comes with a terrible price, and each and every person with reading east from 135 has paid that price. High IQ persons usually have also extremely vivid and wide spectrum of emotions and emotional life. Keep in mind, Susanna, English is probably like her fifth or something language. I don't know. I think she knows.
I'm going to guess third, maybe fourth.
I think it's probably third. But she knows
we have Finnish, Swedish. I think she knows Finnish, Swedish, German, English. I don't know if she knows Estonian. I think she learned Spanish. I'm not sure. I think she has a couple other under her belt, but I can't recall off the top of my head.
She is like a
so she writes an awful lot of English with big hints of Finnish grammar. So
yeah, right, exactly. Let's see. High IQ persons usually have also extremely vivid and wide spectrum of emotions and emotional life, and when they are happy, they are in rapture. When they are unhappy, it is sheer emotional hell. The IQ is a great enabler, and it unfortunately also enables to experience unhappiness in much deeper and profound way than anyone with mediocre IQ would. Homo sapiens are herd animals, and humans are most happy when they are amongst their own herd, or tribe, as I call it. Unfortunately, a phrase that I won't try to...
Lika bäst, which is
similar
Swedish.
Kids play best together. So yeah. And the more homogeneous a group is, the more integrate and tightly knit the group is, and the less there are internal conflicts or disputes. When someone is excluded from a group, ousted or ostracized, it makes him or her unhappy. Loneliness and exclusion is the most common reason for anomie, losing the reason for life and will to live and to commit suicide. An overtly high IQ is the most certain way to get excluded and ousted. The reason is the communication range. It makes you different and not fit in. The concept of communication range was established by Letta Hollingworth. It is plus or minus 2 standard deviations up or down from one's IQ. It denotes the range where meaningful interaction, communication, discussion, conversation, and socializing is possible. Keep note on meaningful there. If the IQ difference between two persons is more than 30 points, the communication breaks up. The higher IQ person will look like an incomprehensible nerd, the lower IQ as a moronic dullard, and they will not find anything common. Plus or minus 30 points does not sound much, but once the IQ is past 135, the downsides are imminent. When someone has a perfectly mediocre IQ, 100 for Caucasian average, his communication range is from 70 to 130, which covers some 98% of the whole population. When it is 135, it is from 105 to 165, which is approximately 36% of the population. And it gets worse. If it is 162, your whole meaningful set of human interactions is restricted to Mensa qualifying people only, 2% of the whole population. Good luck for finding friends, acquaintances, colleagues, or a spouse. And it gets worse. When the average IQ of a group is lower than the lower end of your communication range, the group will see you as a hostile outsider. They will do anything to bully you out of their presence. They will ostracize, excommunicate, and oust you amongst themselves. Sorry, but this is basic human psychology. Human group dynamics dictates that when the diversity grows too big, the group becomes incompatible. The group interaction becomes impossible, and high IQ means exactly that. You may say that nobody must left behind, and that mobbing and bullying is nasty and unacceptable, but our biology dictates otherwise. Exclusion is the basis for cooperation. A group which does not exclude people differing from the norm or otherwise eliminate their presence becomes dysfunctional. Let me put this bluntly. Every single human being with an IQ of 135 plus has experienced this exclusion, ousting, and loneliness. The stereotype of a lonely genius does not come from empty air. It is a cruel reality, and each and every human being with IQ 135 plus has experienced such unhappiness and misery the mediocre IQ people cannot even imagine in their nightmares. I have cried my cubic meter of tears. In this issue, that unhappiness is due to loneliness and the loneliness is due to the communication range is something very few high IQ people ever realize. The secret for happiness is to find your own tribe, to find a group of reference where the average IQ is well in your communication range and where you are accepted as what you are and where you are genuinely liked and approved. In my own case, it is sailors and skydivers. The average IQ in both groups is well beyond 130. Once you have found your own tribe, the unhappiness and misery will lift off. You will experience something which comes naturally to the mediocrities. You may even find meaningful human relationships, friends, and even a wife or husband there. It is no secret many skydivers are either single or married to each other. Let me illustrate this with a personal example. I have volunteered in the Finnish military. The Finnish military is based on universal male conscription, while females may volunteer. Since all able-bodied men are bound to serve on pain of prison, the cohort really is an intersection of the whole society. If we discount us girls, we slept in separate lodges but trained with boys. The boot camp consisted of conscripted boys. The average IQ of Finns is 99. It was very much an intersection of boys born on one certain year. Our company consisted of some 160 boys, of which 15 were washed out during the boot camp. This would predict that there were 4 boys and me whose lower limit of communication range was over the average, and 4 whose upper limit IQ was below it. Needless to say, all but one of the low-end boys were washed out, but those with top high IQ had real difficulties in fitting in, as did I. I won't go into details, but let's say there were conflicts. Once the boot camp was over and we were officially privates, the selection for special training was made. I was assigned to a technical and demanding branch where the average IQ was almost 1 standard deviation higher than in the boot camp. Now, if the boot camp had felt like a prison or concentration camp, the specialist training was more akin to a comprehensive school. I found it much easier to fit in, and my motivation to serve returned. When an opportunity to apply for officer training opened, I thought it would provide a way for me to climb a couple of rungs on the military ladder from the bottom of the food chain. To my surprise, I was approved. The training was hard and tough. The boot camp had been only a mild prelude compared to what we cadets had to endure, but we were volunteers, and the average IQ of military engineering cadets was close to 130. From the first day on, I felt I am now amongst my own. I liked each and every minute of it. While the training was straight from hell, I can still remember the team spirit and the unity we experienced. It was like being in a boarding school, like Eton or Harrow. We performed lifelong friendships. Unfortunately, I failed as an officer. My IQ at the lower end of my communication range was higher than the average of the privates. They saw me as an incomprehensible nerd and would not accept me as their leader, so I resigned and went for academia. It is cliche to say all high IQ people are genuinely unhappy. No, they aren't. IQ is a great enabler, nothing more. But I will say, all high IQ people have experienced such terrible unhappiness which is utterly uncommon against the lesser brain. And the reason for this is the communication range which breeds loneliness, but once they find their own tribe, they become happy as can be. And I will...
Alright, so that's a very politically incorrect piece, to put it very lightly.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And I would say that is the case largely due to the fact that the entire idea of communication range, if misunderstood, completely reeks of elitism. You know, so many people that haven't experienced wanting to connect with somebody on a particular level and not being able to do it, we'll say, oh, you just think that you're better.
Mm-hmm.
You think you're better than me. You think that you're a better person. Like, and then there's all of this emotional baggage that comes with simply making this. And there are even people that have high IQ that are like, well, I can't possibly say this because it'll ostracize other people. And there are conditions that I can have meaningful relationships with people that are technically outside my communication range. And then there are people that say, well, the communication range isn't really a thing.
It's not a hard, fast rule.
And no, it's not a hard, fast rule.
It's not like, oh, once you over the 30-point gap, it's all, oh my god. It won't make sense.
It's not like you have this thing where these are the only people that you can interact with are 30 points to either side of you. But it does kind of give a certain set of parameters that you can expect your interactions to fit. And while I'm talking, I was wondering, would you mind finding that one answer by Chris Marcio regarding the a variety of colors?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So while Steven's searching out this answer, I'll tell you basically what it is. It's probably one of the best, if not the best explanation, the best analogy I've ever heard about the communication range. And it has to do with the different levels that you can go and explore a topic with someone before something becomes strained or difficult. And depending on the way different people interact with the world around them, you can see that there are a certain subset of things that people can connect on and a certain subset that people can't. There's a universal subset of things that pretty much all humans can connect on. I would say maybe with the exception of people that are really, really mentally ill or something. And then on top of that, there are layers of depth and layers of would you mind sending me this via WhatsApp or via something other than Discord?
I had it up if you wanted me to read it as well.
Well, that would be great. I just like to have the picture here for everyone else to see too.
Yes, good idea.
If you could send it to me via WhatsApp, that'd be great because the picture really sets it makes everything quite clear.
Yes, I agree. See.
And then after we look at Chris Marcio's answer, we can go on to somebody who's decided to pick apart Susanna Viljanen's answer in what is a very commonly articulated view expressed in a particular opinion piece, which is basically the idea that communication range doesn't exist.
Oh yeah, if you type in communication range into Google, I think the two first ones that come up are talking about how it's a myth, pretty much.
Oh yeah.
Which is pretty unfortunate for anyone who is actually interested in learning about it. It sort of puts a negative, like, it basically leaves no room for them to sort of make their own opinion on it. Like it's a logical fallacy, I think, called it's poisoning the well, almost.
Mm-hmm.
Where politicians will do that. Well, they'll basically stream vitriol at whatever the opposing argument is, and then they'll go on to make their case, right? So, oh, this is a myth. Now let me tell you. Like, it basically primes you to, like, not believe it, essentially. Or even not really. It takes away room for you to critically think about it, like, because you have this presumption in your head.
In the meantime, we'll get to reading Chris's answer. Lovely.
All right, it's in your WhatsApp, so I'll start reading it.
All right, good. Just one moment. I will.
Okay.
It'll open, and then I will go to. I'll pull it up for everyone else to see. Here we go. The question was, a lot of people on Quora are going around saying that they can't have meaningful conversations with those that have IQs that are 2 standard deviations below or above their IQs. As a profoundly gifted person, do you think this is the case?
All right, cool. I'll read it. See. Oh, and I can answer David Sanderson's. He said having a high verbal intelligence advantage education. Philip very, very intelligently says, with whom? David Sanderson says, people with high verbal intelligence can express themselves more efficiently. They may not be able to express their thoughts in 30 seconds, but they might be able to write a book explaining it. Yes, that's true that people with high verbal intelligence are great communicators, but that is communicating with who is very important. Essentially, if their audience is not a great receptor to this level of communication, it's just going to go over their head, and the nuances that the highly verbal person is going over will just seem superfluous to the other person, and they'll be asking them to get to the point. It's the same reason why Richard Feynman was a great teacher. He had above average verbal intelligence, but nothing spectacular. Maybe a standard deviation to 2 standard deviations. But his nonverbal intelligence was profoundly gifted, like in a very, very potent way. He was like, like 6+ standard deviations for nonverbal. So he understood these esoteric physics concepts, and he was able to basically relay them in layman terms. And another physicist, I forgot, is David Hegel, I think. I don't know. Regardless, there was another physicist that they were. I saw this comparison somewhere. I don't know where it is now, but essentially, who was also pretty much equally as brilliant, or similarly brilliant, but even his verbal was also very high. And his ideas came across as incomprehensible, and his writing was not exactly well received and stuff like that, because he was just communicating at a level that was way too indigestible for like the majority of people who would be looking at it. So yeah.
So if you've had a chance to look at this image for a while, we go basically. So the way that for those of you who don't program computers or know about the way that color is coded. So computers use zeros and ones to code information. If you have 1-bit color is either one thing, a 0, or another thing, a 1. So we'll say that green is 0 and white is 1. So the flower is your drawing is either going to be white or green. Now, if you have 4 bits, you basically are counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So there are 15 different colors, plus nothing. So 16 different colors to choose from. If you do 8-bit, then it's 16. So 32, 64, 128, 256. So you have 256 different colors in 8-bit in the 8-bit realm. And then okay, so 256. Then you have another 8-bit. So 512, 1024, 2048, 40, 96. Okay, so basically 16-bit color brings you about to the resolution that your eye can take in. So, the way that you look at different colors and different transitions and different shades, Chris Marcio uses as an analogy for communicating about other things.
Yes.
So 64K. Okay, so 65,536 shades. So color transitions are smooth. Flowers look lifelike. Depth perception is easy. And you go to 8 bits. You can see, and I don't know how good the picture is on the stream here, but you can see a little bit of difference on the color transitions. But It's
it's decent.
It's decently good. So 16-bit versus 8-bit, you'd have to be really carefully looking at things. But when you go to 4-bit, it starts looking, well, you only have 16 colors to choose from. So, as he says, it looks caricature-like. Most transitions are lost. Fine details are lost. The flowers look like a white planar patch. Petals are barely distinguishable. The perception of depth brought by shadows is mostly gone. For example, the two flowers appear fused and at the same distance. And the 1-bit, so 2 shades, is just a sketch. Vast, solid white and green blotches. So you know 2 flowers, and that's about it. So now what he says is, imagine 4 people, each one of them perceiving the world like each bit of depth. The one who sees in 16-bit may point at a subtle shade or transition that the 8-bit one can infer with some effort. The 4-bit one can't. The 1-bit is completely lost because the only thing the 1-bit person can understand is the flower's shape. So colors and shadows aren't even a thing. So can the 16-bit person have a meaningful conversation with the 1-bit person? Yes, but the onus is on him to get rid of almost the entire 64K color, or 65, say 65K of extra information. He needs to think only about the contours, and he needs to think only about the shapes, and so on. If he starts explaining in a 16-bit way to a 1-bit person, the 1-bit person might think he's a liar. The 1-bit person might think he's arrogant, and so on.
Oh, yeah.
There are subtleties, variations, differences in perspective helped by the broad number of combinations of shade that the higher bit depth sees naturally. But for the 8-bit one, I need some clarification, as he doesn't see it that smoothly. It gets much harder to explain to the 4-bit person who sees serious banding and has almost no depth perception. And at 1-bit, there's significant effort to be made, and the person will have to imagine things he never noticed in his life as he's being lectured about more than the basic contours. For example, saying, the flower has a center-colored purple with a yellow protuberance in the middle is impossible to grasp. For the 1-bit person, without significant effort explaining purple, yellow, and protuberance to him, as those are all attributes outside of his perception capability. He'll need to memorize that. For he can't see purple or yellow, and thus he doesn't know how it looks. His inability to perceive depth will also impede him from mentally representing what a protuberance is. It's an exercise of his imagination. He just knows the center is different from the petals, not how different or any detail about how the difference looks. Then he goes and talks about representing 4D things in one's mind, and how that would work. And since he doesn't,
by 4D,
he can't do
you
that.
Do you think he means time, like on a continuum?
It may very well be. I'm not entirely certain. We'd have to ask him. I would guess that it would have to do with time, or it could just have to do with seeing how the 3-dimensional thing varies or just finding some other way of representing time in your head, because relating to time comes from the Latin word temporal, so we all have different ways of relating to it. So I'm not entirely certain, but basically he has difficulties going and being able to characterize things in 4 dimensions, whereas his friend seems to not have that kind of trouble. Valuable lesson learned. If you don't want others to laugh at you for things you consider of interest, it's better to shut up and give them real reasons to laugh with you or at you. At least then you'll receive from others just what you expect. So don't expect a 4-bit person to have a 16-bit understanding, ever. And interact with people on a level where the meaning overlaps. Now, things can be more or less meaningful to you, but the extent of the meaning of a conversation is only that which overlaps. And the onus is always on the person with the higher capacity to resolve an image or to understand a concept.
And the way the analogy bridges here is that process of essentially being like a translator for yourself is like you essentially use metacognition, right? So you have to be able to gauge, and this is, I think, a big crux for kids because they have problems. I mean, as a kid, you have less experience with people, and especially if you're a very smart kid, you probably have very smart parents as well. It's at least statistically likely. So your frame of reference is not exactly calibrated to the basically population as a whole, right? And so kids will have problems finding, like realizing that what they're saying is not being comprehended. They won't, and so they'll be confused when say a little kid is using maybe very high level vocabulary for their age, or they're talking about something that other kids just basically their eyes glaze over and they don't really realize it. And so this really starts right at childhood. And almost most strongly in childhood, because it's a learned skill to be able to like scale up and down and maybe speak differently, and constantly metacognize and make sure that what you're saying is not too out there. But it's basically metacognition and like choosing what you say. Out of all the things that you could possibly say, you have to pick which one you think would be accessible. And this can be a really hard process when you don't know, especially when you don't know much about the person. So it could even throw off like first impressions and all this stuff. So, yeah.
Well, that's partially the purpose of small talk and so on. But the thing is that lots of people, the art of doing it right has largely gone away. Like the very, very few people actually know how to do small talk in a way that doesn't, or that's relevant to pretty much anybody. Because it involves a degree of emotional maturity and quickly calibrating oneself to the tone and nature of the situation. So especially, if you're an Aspie, it's going to be way more difficult. If you're completely normal, it's going to be way more difficult. But if you have enough, a lot of it has to do with life experience to pull from many different realms. It's an awful lot easier to gauge another person and let them see you in an appropriate light so you can engage on a mutually significant level. I'm here, I'm putting the link to Chris Marcio's answer into the chat for any of you who are interested. I'm going to do it in accordance with the Quora link just so that things don't get screwed up. There we go. But now that we've gone and looked at Chris's answer, or Christian's answer, we can go and look at the poo throwing of the myth of the 30 IQ point communication range.
All right.
It's full of a whole bunch of
course
ads,
is the first Google result if you type in communication.
Which is quite sad. Here I'm going to go and move it a little bit so that hopefully we'll be able to read. Or I'll just put this back to wherever it was before and just remove our pictures for the time being. Or I'll remove myself and leave you there so that you can be there reading, and I'll just be here scrolling.
All right, I'll read. All right, so the title is The Myth of the 30 IQ Point Communication Range. Earlier this week, I tweeted a link to a Quorum post which I felt was rather silly. The post keep in mind felt. The post was a response to the question, are people with very high IQs generally happy? And it answered in the negative. And then we've already read Susanna's answer, but it goes over how she says how people with above 135, they pay a price for it. Having extremely vivid emotions, etc., like that. And you know, the unhappiness that comes with being excluded. The reason for the frequent misery of the intelligent, according to the Quorum, was something called the communication range. So she talks about how Letta and it's roughly plus or minus 2 standard deviations from you. Okay, so when I read this, the communication range struck me as at best an oversimplification. However, many people replied to my tweet, and a fair proportion seemed to take the idea seriously. I also found several references to the concept online, so I decided to take a look into it. Here's what I found. As far as I can tell, the idea of the 2 standard deviation IQ communication range did not start with Letta Hollingworth. She was a pioneering psychologist who did conduct research on high IQ individuals and published extensively on the topic. However, she never used the term communication range nor explicitly discussed such an idea. The term I think coined by Grady Towers in 1987 in an article called The Outsiders. Towers said there that Hollingworth implicitly defined the 30-point IQ point range when she wrote that observation shows that there is a direct ratio between the intelligence of the leader and that of the led. To be a leader to his contemporaries, a child must be more intelligent, but not too much more intelligent than those to be led. But generally speaking, a leadership pattern will not form, or it will break up when a discrepancy of more than about 30 points comes to exist between the leader and the led. Towers comments on this passage as follows. The implication is that there is a limit beyond which genuine communication between different levels of intellect becomes possible. Okay, so he says, this seems to me a significant logical leap. Hollingworth was writing specifically about leadership and in children, but Towers extrapolates that the point to claim that any kind of genuine communication is impossible across a 30-point IQ gap. It is worth noting that although Hollingworth was an academic psychologist, her remark about leadership does not seem to have been stated as a scientific conclusion from research, but simply as an observation. Towers was not a psychologist, but a member of various high IQ societies. The Outsiders was published in Gift of Fire, the journal of the Prometheus Society, membership of which is open to anyone scoring above the 99.997th percentile of IQ. Grady Towers died in 2000 at the age of 55 while working as a security guard. So as far as I can see, the communication range is just an idea someone came up with. It's not based on data. A reference to specific numbers gives the illusion of scientific precision, but these numbers were plucked from the air. Of course, that 2 people might struggle to communicate because of differences in their mental capacities or any other personal differences is hard to doubt. But this always does happen once a specific difference of IQ points is reached seems doubtful. Okay, so there's like thousands of holes to poke, but I'll let you if you want to say something. I can go too if you want.
Well, let me do one thing. I was having a little bit of trouble with the background music. Let me turn the volume up a touch. There we go. So going off of there was a reason that I suggested looking at Christian Marcio's answer before taking an actual look at this particular piece, likely because Susanna's answer was written in such a way that could be perceived as being more abrasive than Christian's.
Yes, and Christian also very intelligently mentioned he instead of looking at others, he focused on how he couldn't do the 4D thing. That was, I think, a very incredibly smart of him to do.
Yeah,
he looked at his own shortcut.
It was, and ultimately, Susanna was. I mean, she was answering the question posed.
Mm-hmm.
You can't fault someone for answering the question, but still, people wind up going and throwing an awful lot of additional requirements on the answer based on their own emotional safety levels.
Yes.
So if someone isn't feeling particularly safe, then they're going to be talking, well, I don't feel like this person understands me. And if you go and you say, well, that's because this person has the emotional depth of an ocean, whereas this other person has the emotional depth of a teaspoon. Or the same with cognitive depth. It's very hard to say that in a way that doesn't sound elitist. Even if it is,
right.
Even if it is actually stating something that's true, which is kind of which is kind of a challenge.
It's a challenge, big challenge for sure.
But I wish I had the article with me, but I was reading an article just yesterday about women and men in depth of emotional experience, and there were two kinds of emotions that men categorically experience more deeply than women. One was disgust, and the other was, and I can't even recall what it was, but we'll go with disgust. Heart rate depression was used as the metric by which extent of emotion experienced was measured. And then there was some other way that was that actual responsiveness to the emotion was measured. And women responded way more readily to the emotion of disgust than did men. In other words, trying to avoid a disgusting stimulus, even though the men felt disgust more than women. So the people have all sorts of different reactions to different things, and they're largely dependent upon an individual person. But as you're dealing with a particular range of 60 IQ points from end to end, or especially a smaller range of 30 IQ points, so plus or minus 15, there's still going to be a lot of similarities and a lot of overlaps. I mean, nobody goes and says that there's a hard and fast cutoff point. The only reason people might do that is to give some sort of a quantitative idea, relatively speaking, that one can have a conversation with a particular percentage of the population at a level where they're seeing the world in the same resolution and don't have to modulate what they're saying or doing too much in order to be understood by the other person. Because remember, it's not only the emotions of the lower IQ person that need to be taken into consideration, but if you care about somebody on a human level, you're going to try to connect with them in a way that is significant to them. Talking with somebody who has a similar set of life experiences when you don't run into one very often, it's like a breath of fresh air. It feels safer. And a lot of what Susanna is describing, and a lot of what Christian is describing, is built upon this implicit understanding or desire to feel safety and belonging. And if people are, even in any subtle way, hostile, safety and belonging quickly go out the window. I'll give an example without giving any names about something that wound up happening to me. Now, we have two people that I deal with regarding the place that we live in. Our landlord is absolutely amazing. And our groundskeeper is, I'd say quite objectively, a caring guy. But the groundskeeper of the place we live in and I could not be more opposite in many different ways. And we were working on a roofing project together. And simple things like measuring distances and measuring angles were things that he didn't see as necessary. You just get it close enough, and then you use a plane, or if you cut it too short, well, then just go cut yourself a longer board and make it like 4 inches longer, and then cut off the other thing with a chainsaw if you need to do that. He had certain ways that he had adopted for like not having to measure and not having to think about things. You know, the angle of a roof is always 45 degrees, and if it's not, well, then I guess whenever you're dealing with a thing, you could just take a plane and then and modulate the angle rather than measuring and say, well, okay, it was 38 degrees or 42 degrees or whatever, and then setting the circular saw to that. So these very, very basic things like what angle do you set the circular saw to? Things I didn't know would be an element of contention were. You know, he asked, okay, what's the angle of the roof? And then I went and I measured them, 40 degrees. And he was very surprised that I even had the tools, because he didn't. After having worked in construction 35 years, he didn't have the tools for measuring these things. And I just went and you know, pulled it out, measured. It was okay. We have to have a 50-degree angle to the normal, which is 40 degrees to the to the actual surface. So we need to set the circular saw to 40 degrees. Well, that was a big thing. We're just going to cut it at a 45. We'll split the difference between the 50 and the 40. Cut it at a 45. I always cut it at a 45. Okay. And then, you know, I went and still I set it to a 40. It fit perfectly. I saved him a great deal of time by, you know, measuring twice before cutting once, and doing some calculations regarding, well, you know, just basic geometric figures and things like that. And I was really trying to use my skill set to be helpful to him on this roofing project, even though I was mostly doing it out of a favor to the landlord, just because, well, you know, I like the guy and I'd like to help him maintain his property. Well, either way, the relationship between the two of us is kind of strained, in that we both relate to the world in a very different way. I'm way more abstract than this other guy is, and so we wind up bumping heads, and he's always surprised at how I would use my brain if there was just a task of pulling all of the nails from the roof, or from certain spacers that were used to space the roof tiles away from the wood of the roof. No, I went through the process, but I needed to use a crowbar and a hammer. So I went and I used the crowbar on all the things and then got things reasonably loose, and then I used the hammer to get them the rest of the way. But I didn't pull the nails one at a time. I loosened all the nails, then I went through all the nails and pulled them all out. Boom, 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 boom. And the guy was initially very, very angry at me because I hadn't pulled out a single nail. After many minutes, I had just loosened them all. And he was losing it. He was just having an emotional crisis. Like, well, you're being useless. You're useless. It's just like, no, just calm down, watch, and wait. And then there at the end, I just went pop, 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 pop. all the nails out in seconds. Then the next time he looks over, he sees all the nails are gone. And he was completely confused. He didn't know how that worked. I told him, well, I was just planning. I thought a little bit before acting. I always like to think before doing, so that I don't wind up having to redo things, or having to waste time or waste energy and effort to get things done. It's just a way of looking at the world. He obviously didn't care about wasting time or effort or investing enough time beforehand in order to minimize the amount of work that he would do later. He valued hard work as opposed to smart work. So I was planning on working with him, and I worked with him a couple more days. And then he corners my wife and starts venting to her, essentially, about working with me. And he talks about how he can't stand people who spend time behind a computer. He can't stand people who are theoretical. And starts listing all these different things as if they're character flaws or something that makes people that have them less human. And in spite of how well we had worked together, and in spite of how we had gotten over our differences, the fact that he decided he wanted to gripe to my wife for 20-30 minutes, even though it was just a feelings thing on his part, the fact that he didn't get a grip was hurtful to me. Because I got a grip on my feelings. I knew what the situation was regarding him, and I knew that if I wanted to be of service, I would have to, even though I hadn't been in construction for 35 years, I'd have to be interacting with him on his terms. But he didn't even try. And that lack of humanity, that lack of respect, I completely shut down at that point. It's like, I can't help anymore. And maybe this is wrong of me, and maybe it shows an incredible emotional weakness in myself, but I haven't exchanged more than a few words at a time with him since then. And interestingly, it seems like he's completely clueless as to what he even said or did, just because, he's just, I feel this way about this, and doesn't actually realize the impact that his words have on other people. Like if I were to have behaved half as disrespectfully toward him, and his way of doing things as me, he would have been very, very hurt. But because he doesn't even understand what intuition is, and he's never even tried to live in my world, I'm struggling with this whole idea of what's fair to expect of him and what's not. And Hanlon's razor comes to mind. Never explain or never attribute to malice that which can be explained by a more benign means. Or, as Hanlon originally said, never attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. But really, I don't want to have to do that. I really don't want to have to go and say, well, this person is just so...
Right. Because it feels negative.
Yeah, even for me it feels negative. I don't want to be disparaging toward him, even though I might be stating a fact.
Right. Exactly.
But the fact that he decides that it's perfectly okay to poop all over my feelings, cognitive dissonance, throw poo. The fact that that's an appropriate response for him, and people will laud him for talking about, oh, he's got his feet on the ground, he's a good, solid worker. Whereas if I go and I say this, and I try to talk about my feelings, it's much more difficult to find people that'll take the time to understand and to care about my humanity at the same level that they would care about this other dude. And that's why I value good friends. You know, the saying, they're worth more than their weight in gold. It's absolutely true. And that's why Susanna keeps on talking about finding your own tribe. I mean, heck, my dad never paid for it, but he, when he was in high school, often played hooky to go sailing. And he went sailing with a bunch of, you know, late teens, early 20s guys. And they went and measured all sorts of water depths and currents and things like that around the archipelagos and wrote a book about it. And then sold a bunch of books at marine conventions, like mariners' conventions. And used it in sailing scouts to go and buy, I think it was something like a 6 million mark, or the equivalent of 6 million euro. I think it was 6 million mark boat, or a sail, or like a sailing ship. And that was, but the whole sailing thing. My dad had found a bunch of, you know, slightly older friends that were into sailing, and he spent his time doing that rather than going to school. Growing up, I had friends who flew model airplanes. And there was an element of connection in doing these different kinds of things that you couldn't find anywhere else. And there are some hobbies that cost a lot of money. There are some hobbies that cost a little. There are some hobbies you can just go and show up and enjoy the company and not actually have to put any money into it at all. So if you're dealing with these kinds of communication range issues, Susanna's advice is very apt. Now find your tribe. And when you do find them, appreciate them. Because it really does matter.
For sure. No, it's yeah, no, and the opinion piece. Okay, first of all, when people say they're just skeptical, I always to me that could mean like many different things, right? Like a lot of times people are just skeptical because they didn't actually put time into understanding, but they're at least smart enough to realize that to, like, I guess, not make conclusions, but or like at least that's how the guise works, right? Oftentimes it's just you know, it's just literally a lack of effort to understand or change preconceived notions, and then they just say, "Oh, I'm skeptical." Like, "Oh, I'm so smart and careful with my thoughts," but in reality, they're just lazy with them and are not actually trying to make an effort to learn. And this comes across very strongly as that. He felt rather silly. That he prefaces it by a feeling, which and then it seems he selectively. He talks about Letta Hollingworth and what she observed, but instead of like actually like basically he tries to lead the attention away from the psychologist who spent a lot of time on this sort of thing to this security guard. He had to mention that he's a security guard. He had to mention that he wasn't. He basically had to mention that the person was not like a reputable source. It's kind of like trying to use argument of authority, right? Like trying to say this guy has no authority because he's a security guard, and stuff like that. And then he talks about how the logical. Okay, so first of all, what's important for a leader? What's the most important attribute for a leader to be able to communicate with their, or not to be able to communicate, but what's the most important relationship between leader and followers? And that is that simply has to be communication, or at least it's up there. It's very important regardless. So it is not a significant logical leap to say that communication between leader and followers would mimic communication between friends or other people.
In fact, leader-follower communication is less equal than friends communication. Like friends would be really, really close friends. Certainly, you know, there's exceptions to the rule, but that's like one SD either way.
Yeah, exactly, and so essentially, It's not a logical leap at all. And at least in my view, of course I could be wrong. And then he points to, like, he focuses on essentially significant figures, right? Like, 30 points, like, so specific. Like, it's a heuristic, dude. It's not a set in stone rule, and it's a spectrum as well. It's not a black or white thing, and he treats it as such, essentially. And then he just goes up later on. He just says it's not based on data. Well, guess what? If it was based on observation, that's data. Like, seeing the relationship breakdown in kids, that's data that she observed. I don't know. I don't know how that doesn't suffice to be data. So that seems wrong. And then he says, it gives the illusion of scientific precision, but these numbers were plucked from the air. Like, it's again, it's like, maybe they.
It's
a trend.
It's a trend. The lines are blurry.
Exactly.
Maybe that should have been prefaced that way, but I think at least to anybody who was in the know, that was kind of obvious.
Yeah, it should. That's very, like, is that not completely intuitive?
But it is completely intuitive, and the guy who's doing this is clearly not intuitive.
Yeah, no, clearly. And then, then that two people might struggle to communicate because of differences in their mental, like, it's just an opinion piece. And, like, it seemed like, it's just full of, like, slights against Grady Towers, and against Letta Hollingworth, and, like, how it was just an observation. Like, well, gravity's an observation, and of course it's not like gravity. That's an improper analogy, but, like, rules are hard. Like, rules are, and especially when applied to people and psychology and sociology, like, there's no, like, it's a soft science. Like, it's not physics. We're not talking about like a rule. When we're talking about, like, it's implied that the stuff is pretty loose and just generally talking about trends and about groups, etc., and not individuals. So, like it's just, it's stupid. It's completely stupid that he would, like, go under that guy. Like, I don't know if it was on purpose or if he's just literally just not thinking and being skeptical, because he's on the Neuroskeptic. That's the website, but like, no, it's not a physics paper. Again, it's essentially a psychological phenomena. It's not. There aren't hard, fast rules, and that's just blatantly implied. Like, just, if you can imply something blatantly, it is, and so it's just a huge, like, it's just basically riddled with errors in my mind. And this piece. And basically elicited, the whole piece was basically provoked by some emotional reaction. Oh, that seems silly. Let me prove why it's silly. And like, so it's just like, yeah, it's not. And it sucks that that's the first thing that comes up when you talk about the communication range. As I said, poisoning the well, so to speak.
But people like to discriminate. This is falling right back into what Susanna originally said about ejecting from your midst that which is sufficiently different. And humans are herd animals. That's why it is important for everyone to find their tribe, at least insofar as humanity winds up being what humanity is. Now, it's a lot easier to deal with that communication range if, for instance, everyone in a particular group already kind of has a set of shared values. That can ameliorate a lot of the differences.
Yes, and shared hobbies, shared values, shared experiences.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things help. All of these things help a lot.
Shared home, so family.
Yes, a shared home.
Exactly. Even so, I know lots of people that have parents with a different IQ than they have, that
struggle.
Oh yeah, especially if they have siblings that are closer to their parents, then it clearly becomes a case of favoritism.
Yes, precisely, and especially And we're talking about 30-point differences. There's people I know with 60-point differences between their parents, and yeah, I mean, it's hard to see how it's hard to feel even it. You know they're your parents, but like the relation doesn't feel as strong as it would be if you were closer in intelligence to them. And that's just an artifact of human nature, essentially. How we communicate with people more similar to us. So when huge differences arise, and especially an intellectual difference, which is like intellect is the medium for communication, almost the brain, etc. It's not surprising at all. Like this communication range is not we can see how people of similar intellect who have very different experiences. It's easy to see that they struggle. There's with etc. discrimination and poo throwing and stuff like that, and that's just maybe very slight cultural differences. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's literally just a visible difference. But I mean, this is a fundamental difference in thought that's not visible on the surface. So and especially because it affects them. Of course, these things tend to do, it affects the margins, right? And that basically gives more weight to the people who aren't, because most people aren't struggling with this. Most people are average, and most people can communicate with a large portion of the people. But the people who are on the ends, who are struggling with it, and the people on the bottom end are not able to articulate this struggle. I'm sure they at least feel it to some extent. But people with very heavily mentally disabled people they would struggle with this too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
they very well do. I mean, and they can't articulate it the same way that someone that would be on the top enders can. But yes, I know that they feel it that way. My mom would occasionally do testing of these kinds of people, and many years ago I would go along. She was a teacher for handicapped students of all sorts. So basically, anyone that didn't fit the mold would get thrown into her classroom. And sometimes, there would be these safety concerns. My mom never really had problems with the kids, but there were safety concerns. So I would go along with them. And there would be, low-functioning autistic people. There would be people that couldn't tie their shoes. There would be people who were 14 years old and had a 3 or 4 year mental age, or worse. Kids with cerebral palsy that were likely not gonna make it to their 18th birthday. And I'm talking completely opposite side of the bell curve to where you or I are. Mm-hmm. And they weren't saying anything about how it felt. But when you can spot someone who is an outsider, and you immediately hone in on it. You just know that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Even if you're not, for instance, an Aspie, but you can spot someone who has Asperger's. You're not an autist, but you can spot someone who has autism. Or you might have a trait or two or something. You're not full-blown ADHD, but you can easily relate to people that have it to a bigger extent than you do, or all these different kinds of things.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's the same for literally people that you'll walk into the bathroom and find them with their pants around the ankles, looking into the toilet, analyzing their poop, talking to themselves about it. There's still the ability to empathize with them due to the very fact that they're different.
Mm-hmm,
and interestingly, when I would work at work as a cashier and a bagger at a grocery store, people who were in the minority in all sorts of different things, whether it be race, or whether people felt picked on because of their gender, or whether people felt picked on because of their sexual orientation, or any of these other different things, I would just make friends. Because I knew enough what it was like to be an outsider that I didn't engage in the same kind of behaviors that others did and ostracize them. And so even though we might be completely on the opposite end of the spectrum, like for instance with my mom's students, there is that element of understanding. I mean, I'm going to recall very, very vividly one time there was this guy who could barely articulate anything. I mean, the only way that I could possibly communicate anything was to break a rule and give him a hug. No, don't touch people. Touching is unhealthy. No, freaking human touch is important.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But, simply giving somebody a hug that needed one. That's meaningful social interaction. And that's well outside the communication range. But interestingly, it was for the exact same reason that one would communicate with someone in one's communication range.
Yeah. It's a recognition of similarity, basically.
Exactly. So yeah, just treat people like they're humans. And I think on this note, it would, unless you have something else to add, in which case, please do add it. But then after you're done adding whatever you add, or so on and so forth, I think that we can have our intermission.
Yeah. So all I would say to summarize this stuff is, like, it's not some expression of elitism or like, etc. I'm better than you, blah blah blah, this stuff. Like, no, it's just it's again just trying to find your own herd and basically find people that you are emotionally compatible with, and people in pop culture, especially high IQ, is completely like, obviously it's romanticized, right? Just like everything is, because it's more compelling if you write it that way. So it's the person who doesn't have to try in life and just does everything easily and stuff like that. And maybe that's partially true for academics. If academics is what you judge the richness of your life by, how well you do in that, I think that's I don't know, incredible. Like, it's kind of pitiful. That's not the right thing to do. And essentially, it just roots back to just literally emotional compatibility and finding people that, again, you like, feeling like an outsider, and then finding people that you don't feel like an outsider with, and this sort of trait, like, with what is given, like, when you get something is taken away as well, like with advantages. And this is anything. Very rich people, they have problems with having genuine friends, right? They don't know who's there. Like, imagine feeling that. Imagine having massive amounts of wealth and this thing that everyone's climbing for and grabbing at, and this is what everyone wants because this is what everyone thinks is the right thing to have, and this person is essentially struggling to, like, trust people, and because they think people see them only for their wealth, and it's no surprise that very wealthy people often just stick partnered with the people they've known and met before they were wealthy, because they know the screening process is incredibly difficult.
Place. And it already took place.
It took place before the wealth happened, right? And all this stuff, and extremely beautiful people, right? Yes, it's a huge asset and advantage, but, like, you'll see. I have a friend. She's very smart. She's 3 standard deviations. Extremely kind. One of the most, like, literally the most empathetic person I know. Nice to everyone. Loves kids. Like, wants to be a teacher and all this stuff. And brilliant. And she's like a model. She's she's like 4 standard deviations for attractiveness and 3 for intelligence. So she's what everyone would say has everything, right? And in high school, she had hair.
Has everything. I know how that works.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's what they just see traits that they want, and they're, so and then so when someone complains about what someone thinks that they want, and the person comes across to them as incredibly pompous and, you don't know how good you have it. and stuff like that. It's like, no, you don't know how, like, it goes the other way too. You don't know how good you have. And she had a teacher say, for example, like, well, what are you going to do when those looks run out, right? And she was much smarter than the teacher, and said nothing. There was no affronts. And she was in the gifted program, and she got like discriminated against in the gifted program for how good she looked and stuff like that. So yeah, here's this person with all these great things who's basically like having a horrible social time just a horrible time with socialization and with people, and she told me that I was the only male non-relative in her life who has not made an advance on her. And I was like, this person is like, I consider her like a sister. She's ADD too and all this stuff, so we have a lot of similarities. And I was like, shit, like I knew that from a position of power by being a majority, because a majority of people by definition aren't experiencing this sort of thing, right? So by saying an opinion piece that it'll be easier for the audience to agree with what they said than to go out of their way, use system 2 thought, and try to like put themselves in the other person's shoes, I'm sure it gains lots of traction, and I'm sure that's why it's the top listed thing on Google for this. It's no surprise. It's a bit sad, but that's just how it is.
Well, it's because taking a dump on a minority is always going to be a default majority herd activity.
Yes.
I mean, I hate even phrasing it that way, but that's...
yeah. No, but...
it's just a fact of life.
Right. And not all facts of life are, incredibly nice, as I'm sure everyone's aware.
No. But we ultimately do all wind up having to deal with them in whatever way.
And it roots back to that, is like literally just treating people with like human decency. And I mean, I wrote a long answer about this on Quora. They're like, why are very highly intelligent, why do they struggle with relationships? And they said, is it because they're emotionally dull? Well, like, all the evidence goes to show that people on the far right tail have a much greater breadth of emotion and a much heightened sense of emotion. Like, they'll have problems, especially in children, have problems dealing with their emotion because it's just so strong, and it basically envelops them. So no, it's generally it's very strongly correlated, empathy and emotional depth with that as well. So it's a completely wrong assumption, but they're like, oh, why do their relationships break down? And I posited it's because the communication range plays a huge factor, because they have a much smaller pool of basically mates that fit the criteria for a suitable relationship. And so but it's really easy to just say, it's really easy, this simple logical thought, like, okay, so average people don't have, well, they have, obviously the divorce rate's extremely high, so I can't say that, but have not too bad a time with relationships. At least they have it. They by default have an average time with relationships. But when you see an intelligent person in a relationship, the chances are, just statistically, that the person they're dating is probably lower in intelligence, just by regression to the mean. So you'll see more relationship difficulties arise. So the very simple logical thought is, oh, there must be some fault with that person. And there's like a myriad of psychological phenomena that can be used to describe that, like System 1 and 2 Thought by Daniel Kahneman. And victim blaming and all this stuff. So yeah, it's pretty ingrained. So I don't know, but I still think it's a very important topic to cover.
Well, certainly. And if we may conclude before doing this intermission, I think that it's just very important to say that find your own tribe, find the people that you get along well with, but do treat everyone with the dignity due a human being.
Yep.
All right. We'll see you on the other side of the intermission, is what it boils down to. See you after your intermission. Welcome back. So,
Hello.
let's see, what did we talk about? We were just finishing talking about communication range and, even more importantly, of just being understanding of other people.
Yep.
And our next subject, even though we're already 50 minutes into it, is the education hour. So, it'll be a little bit less than an hour. I was thinking that reading an essay, reading the prologue out of a book by John Taylor Gatto, might be a good idea. It's the book is entitled "The Underground History of American Education: An Intimate Investigation into the Prison of Modern Schooling." And I think he deliberately chose such a strong title, given, well, he was at one point voted best teacher in New York City, and then best teacher in New York State, and then after that he quit. And ultimately, that's what I've seen a lot of the education system doing, is driving out the best and the brightest. If you ever watch an interview of this guy, he is amazing. He's a very slow talker and a very thorough thinker. He researches everything that he says to an amazing extent, and I hold this particular book in high regard. So with all of that said, let's get started reading. Prologue. Bianca, you animal, shut up. Our problem in understanding forced schooling stems from an inconvenient fact: that the wrong it does from a human perspective is right from a system's perspective. You can see this in the case of 6-year-old Bianca, who came to my attention because an assistant principal screamed at her in front of an assembly, "Bianca, you animal, shut up!" Like the wail of a banshee, this sang the school doom of Bianca. Even though her body continued to shuffle around, the voodoo had poisoned her. Do I make too much of this simple act of putting a little girl in her place? It must happen thousands of times every day in schools all over. I've seen it many times, and if I were painfully honest, I'd admit to doing it many times. Schools are supposed to teach kids their place. That's why we have age-graded classes. In any case, it wasn't your own little Janie or mine. Most of us tacitly accept the pragmatic terms of public school, which allow every kind of psychic violence to be inflicted on Bianca, in order to fulfill the prime directive of the system, putting children in their place. It's called social efficiency. But I get this precognition, this flash forward to a moment far in the future when your little girl Jane, having left her comfortable home, wakes up to a world where Bianca is her enraged meter maid, or the passport clerk Jane counts on for her emergency ticket out of the country, or the strange lady who lives next door. I picture this animal, Bianca, grown large and mean. The same Bianca who didn't go to school for a month after her little friends took to whispering, "Bianca is an animal! Bianca's an animal!" While Bianca, only seconds earlier, a human being like themselves, sat choking back tears, struggling her way through a reading selection by guessing what the words meant. In my dream, I see Bianca as a fiend manufactured by schooling, who now regards Janie as a vehicle for vengeance. In a transport of passion, she gives Jane's car a ticket before the meter runs out. Throws away Jane's passport application after Jane leaves the office. Plays heavy metal music through the thin partition which separates Bianca's apartment from Jane's, while Jane pounds frantically on the wall for relief. All the above. You aren't compelled to loan your car to anyone who wants it, but you are compelled to surrender your school-aged child to strangers who process children for a livelihood, even though 1 in every 9 school children is terrified of physical harm happening to them in school. Terrified with good cause. About 33 are murdered there every year. Your great-great-grandmother didn't have to surrender her children. What happened? If I demanded you give up your television to an anonymous, itinerant repairman who needed work, you'd think I was crazy. If I came with a policeman who forced you to pay that repairman even after he broke your set, you would be outraged. Why are you so docile when you give up your child to a government agent called a school teacher? I want to open up concealed aspects of modern schooling, such as the deterioration it forces in the morality of parenting. You have no say at all in choosing your teachers. You know nothing about their backgrounds or families. And the state knows little more than you do. This is as radical a piece of social engineering as the human imagination can conceive. What does it mean? One thing you do know is how unlikely it will be for any teacher to understand the personality of your particular child, or anything significant about your family, culture, religion, plans, hopes, dreams. In the confusion of school affairs, even teachers so disposed don't have opportunity to know those things. How did this happen? Before you hire a company to build a house, you would, I expect, insist on detailed plans showing what the finished structure was going to look like. Building a child's mind and character is what public schools do. Their justification for prematurely breaking family and neighborhood learning. Where is documentary evidence to prove this assumption that trained and certified professionals do it better than people who know and love them can? There isn't any. The cost in New York State for building a well-schooled child in the year 2000 is $200,000 per body. In year 2000, 12 years of education, there's $200,000. When lost interest is calculated, that capital sum invested in the child's name over the past 12 years would have delivered $1 million to each kid as a nest egg to compensate for having no school. The original $200,000 is more than the average home in New York costs. You wouldn't build a home without some idea of what it would look like when finished, but you're compelled to let a core of perfect strangers tinker with your child's mind and personality without the foggiest idea what they want to do with it. Law courts and legislatures have totally absolved school people from liability. You can sue a doctor for malpractice, not a school teacher. Every home builder is accountable to customers years after the home is built, not school teachers, though. You can't sue a priest, minister, or rabbi either. That should be a clue. If you can't be guaranteed even minimal results by these institutions, not even physical safety, if you can't be guaranteed anything except that you'll be arrested if you fail to surrender your kid, just what does the public in public schools mean? What exactly is public about public schools? That's a question to take seriously. If schools were public, as libraries, parks, and swimming pools are public, as highways and sidewalks are public, then the public would be satisfied with them most of the time. Instead, a situation of constant dissatisfaction has spanned many decades. Only in Orwell's Newspeak, as perfected by legendary spin doctors of the 20th century such as Ed Bernays or Ivy Lee, or great advertising combines, is there anything public about public schools?
That's like an extremely compelling first part, I will say. Like, holy crap. That guy's a good writer. Great writer, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And he has really great points.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Mrs. Wife. Here. Any thoughts?
Just that I completely agree. I don't want to sound like this some just vacuous echoing parrot, but yeah, no. I mean, I have firsthand experience with public school. I was mainstream completely, and left at grade level as well. So yeah, I'm cognizant of these things for sure. And you'll notice, or I'll notice, not you guys, because you don't maybe won't know this, but it's about my like personal life. But I got in tons of trouble in my elementary K through K through fourth grade. I mean, I was constantly, because I did not work well with like what felt like arbitrary control, and that's essentially what it is. It is arbitrary because there is no, as he said, there's no, well, you know, what says that these people do it better, right? That these people will be able to teach and understand, especially a neurodiverse child or a child on different sides of the bell curve, or a kid from a different culture, etc. All of these things. What's to say that these, you know, these teachers essentially will be able to accommodate for that? And my elementary school was generally considered quite good, and I didn't run into too many horribly malignant things. Like nothing scarring up. Like, no one called me an animal like that girl, right? Like, that's obviously just awful. But I constantly butted heads, and I got in trouble, and I got sent to the principal's quite often. They had the pulling your card system, so if you get in trouble, you do this constantly. And yeah, and I guess slowly the school molded that part of me away, and then I learned to just accept it, and I didn't really think about it until late high school, and then I was like, holy shit, this is garbage. But you know, I was like, oh well, this is not how it works, and etc. And yeah, it's all, but you know, it's really bad. It's really bad for sure, and that's not an understatement. Especially, I mean, don't heed the words of me more than you would heed the words of, you know, literally whatever he was, you know, the top voted the best teacher in the state, right? Like, this guy is the best of the best. Like, why, you know, think about it's like the best soccer player that's saying this sport sucks, this is garbage, why would anyone do this? Like, it's like if Ronaldo came and said anyone who plays soccer is like in like just extreme vitriol at the sport, right? Like, that would be wild, huh? But like this is a similar type of thing. Like, someone who is regarded very highly of the system is completely. So you would think that he would have a vested interest to support it, because it's certainly thrown him accolades and recognition. Like, he's doing this all in spite of that. So that's, I think, very important to take note of.
Mm-hmm. And if I recall correctly, one of the big reasons that he quit, at least according to an interview, or either an interview or a talk he gave, was that the more accolades he got, the more he got put under the microscope, and the more he got put under the microscope, the more he got asked to justify all the different things he did for his students that were outside the scope of what school should be doing, and all the things he refused to be doing that were inside the scope of what school should be doing. For example, he gives the instance of a girl that's interested in swimming. And so he covers for her. He lets her play hooky under the condition that she goes to every single swimming pool in New York City and ranks it. Does chemical tests of all the different pools there, and lane length, depth, water quality, and then writes a piece categorizing, ranking, and saying, okay, I would swim in these pools, I wouldn't swim in those pools, etc., etc. And so she learned about proper writing. She learned about cataloging information. She learned people skills because she was going during school hours to pools and asking to analyze their pool. With it, measuring depth and measuring length, and she learned how all the different water testing kits worked, all the different reagents that you would use for analyzing pool water. She learned, and eventually, was it the New Yorker magazine wanted to use the data that she had collected and offered her especially for a student, but even for anyone, a large sum of money. I can't recall what it was, for her data, to appropriate it and attribute it to another author. And she came from a poor background, but still, she had gone through the process of obtaining this data, and she tried to negotiate and say, well, okay, you can use the data, but don't put someone else's name on it if it's not theirs. Put mine. And they refused. She said, well, then it's my data. I don't care what you're going to give me. My data is my data. I went through the trouble of finding it all. I went through the trouble of doing it all. I'm taking ownership of this. This is my data, and you're not getting it. So, good for her.
Yeah, good, awesome.
But all the time that she was collecting her data, she wasn't in school. Oh, how bad that was. So apparently he had his students going to libraries and learning things and reading things and interviewing people and walking up to people and asking for permission to go places and do things and going places they weren't supposed to be able to even get into and doing things they weren't even supposed to be able to do, all during school hours, and all because they just went up to people and asked. And it became increasingly more and more difficult for him to justify doing this, and once it got to be a certain point, he's just like, quit. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
You think I'm a good teacher, but you're not letting me teach.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, no. Yeah, this evokes some pretty strong emotions, so I'll
well, please do speak from them. I'm perfectly fine with that. People don't want to hear it, they don't have to watch the stream.
Well, just thinking about so I've had, obviously I'm not the perfect rule-abiding citizen, etc. I've run into trouble with people all up and down school, with the law, with all of these things. So I'm like authoritarian in structures, and I've never been the best fit for those sorts of things. But I mean, in some ways, the things I've done throughout my life, some things, of course, I deserve to be, there needs to be some reprimand, of course. But like when someone's doing something like, which could pretty much be stated as, I hate using the word objective, because I want to say it's functionally, basically, objectively good what he's doing. You know, I'm not going to pretend I have some higher truth and I know 100%, but I really think what he was doing was like, that's awesome. And there's a reason he's winning teaching awards, right? Like it sort of was reflecting, but then, for them to basically start restricting that and like basically.
You cut out.
Oh, okay.
I think it was a question on my internet, though.
Yeah. So, is it fair to say when I'm talking about people who are very, very rule-oriented ESTJs? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So, I'm using this as a heuristic, not a generalization. So, please don't pull what is it called, the neuroskeptic interpretation of what I'm about to say. But like, I mean, like, for example, in I mean, I have a personal example of this, which I feel fine sharing because I'm not a very private person, and I'm very open with my experiences, because I feel if you're open with things that other people might be quite covert about, you can often find people of common ground, and people will recognize some sort of genuineness and be more willing to reach out and talk and stuff like that. But so like in senior year, I was going through lots of like mental difficulties as far as like obviously fitting in the system, friendship stuff, like and so I was just saw, like many people do. I was like, okay, I went to see this therapist, right? And this guy was brilliant. He was exceptionally gifted, e.g. An empath, just incredibly nice. And like I wouldn't go there and like vent problems and sob or something. I would just talk to him about cool ideas, and that was enough. Like just having an intellectual conversation with him for an hour was great. And I like many of the problems were alleviated just by having, as I'm an extrovert, by having someone I can cogitate things with and be abstract and follow the train of thought and not basically glaze over or spew shit at you or get mad. That's the worst. But but my mom's a counselor. So, but he was so good. He was very, very well liked. So he got accepted to. So my mom, she works at a university. She's a counselor, and he now works in the same office as she does. So I was like, oh, this is great. Like that's really convenient. But I'm no longer allowed to. I don't need to do this. I have people now like Matt and others that I can talk to things about, and I found my tribe, so to speak, sort of. So those problems, all the problems I was having, basically lifted very quickly, and once I found the right social atmosphere, but I'm not allowed, even if I want to, I'm not allowed to see this person anymore because conflicts of interest. And my mom's boss is notorious EST. She's pushed multiple people out of their job just because they can't deal with her. She's just so rule oriented. She's so dumb that she can't think of anything outside the rules. Like she's incredibly dumb. I don't like to use that as a negative thing to a person, but like dumbness by itself is okay. That's fine. No one, you don't choose that. But when that is affecting other people in a negative way and like malignantly, it becomes something that needs to be stopped. And so because it's like, for example, I have ADD, and during high school, of course, I'm not organized, so I'd have ADD problems. And my mom's like, oh, you should come to my mom runs an ADHD support group where all of the college students come and they talk about it, and they talk about strategies to cope with things, and it's cool, right? So she's like, oh yeah, come to it. So I came, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is great. It's cool, fun to talk to these people. They're off the wall and engaging, and I learn stuff, and it helps you, again, just coming closer to your tribe, right? And people with shared difficulties. Like, what's negative about that? And my mom got in like trouble because it's conflict of interest, and so like. And it's just like, what? Like, what interest, like, what is, I don't understand how interest plays anything in that. Like, what?
Was she getting money if you attended? Okay.
No, there's no money. It's a free service. It's a free service offered to students. So no, there's no, I'm not technically I'm not a student of the university, but I'm a student literally in the University of Missouri system. I'm in the system. And my parents both work there and all this stuff. And like, so it's just so inane, right? Like this, so stupid. And my mom has gotten in trouble for just stupid stuff, like small details. And this person just very authoritarian, just incredibly dense, does not have friends, does not understand kids. She thinks she has cats, and she's like, oh, this is just like having kids. And she said,
Sorry.
yeah, and no, she said, yeah, she's like, my cats are just like having kids. And I don't know. I really I just like every fiber of me just does not like this person. I won't say hate.
Having kids is like having cats. There's a reason that people go and there's the stereotypical crazy cat lady. I mean, not every cat lady is crazy, but those kinds of people that are surrounded only by cats are not surrounded by kids for a reason.
Yeah, because cats are pretty autonomous and also really don't like people that much. They like the services we provide for them, and they tolerate it. Like, you don't just leave a kid, and let them.
You don't leave a kid to go catch mice and then have a can of food sitting out there for them.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, and poop in a box. Yeah.
I think the kid is much more involved. So this lady's just, and yeah, so she's driven many people out of the office just because of how authoritarian, and she and some retreat, right, for work, and essentially people will have a drink, one beer, right, their blood alcohol content is fucking not there, they're not, she won't let anyone who's even drink a beer drive, right, she just doesn't, just incredibly, and it gets and that sort of thing affecting people, and especially and it's just a small instance with me, with good people who I'm lucky that I don't need this person anymore, so I don't need to go see them, and essentially I got lucky that it's scraped by me, right, it missed me. It was a near miss, her authoritarian beam, so to speak, but obviously this teacher's having an amazing effect on these kids, and he can't dodge it, right? This is not something he can escape. I'm assuming Caleb said something funny in chat. My stream went down.
He said, Steven, have you gone through the initiation ritual yet?
Yeah.
What's that, Caleb? You said you found your tribe, so you have to go through the initiation ritual, where Matt flogs you while I read from Kant.
Oh my god. Holy shit. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, so when I see this authoritarian structure, obviously these kids are having a great educational experience. When I see it affecting that sort of thing, it really rubs me the wrong way, especially because I have I have emotional empathy and cognitive empathy invested in that, and so yeah, I mean, I just think it's absolutely awful. And I learned a lot about economics yesterday night, and I can there's even ties to the stupid credentialism of teachers and all this stuff, and you can there's many more ways to say what the problem, to iterate the problems that come with this, outside of just emotional and I guess common sense. but yeah, we might go into that sort of stuff. We will go into that sort of thing in the latter parts of the stream. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Well, with that said, we can already start talking about thinking at the margin.
Nice.
And
I was thinking about how that relates to the free market, right? How the teachers kind of.
They have teachers unions. They have teachers unions in public schools.
Not only is it a free market for teachers. It screws up at that, but it screws up the free market of education, like very strongly.
Yeah, if you're forcing people to buy certain things, then the money isn't able to be used for other things. You're literally siphoning a portion of GDP for indoctrination purposes. That's like forcing everyone here to pay 100 some euro tax for the privilege of watching government TV, even if you don't own a TV.
You can always our tax is donating to Caleb Beer's Patreon.
That would be nice.
And getting his book.
Well, I done do that.
Not
Patreon isn't the most efficient way of doing it, but
strictly enforced only if
I mean, I'll continue doing it until such a point as there's a lot more donations, in which case then I'll just start throwing money in his general direction via PayPal instead. But yeah. With that said, our econ lesson is now 20 minutes overdue just because of that whole 30 IQ point communication range thing, but I'm perfectly okay with that because this isn't a particularly long lesson. It's entitled Thinking at the Margin. Let's cut to that screen. And thinking at the margin basically refers to the idea that things are going as they are going right now. And people largely will conserve that. They're not just going to jump and have gigantic changes all at once in society. So as the book says, many of the choices we make concern doing more or less of something. Should we have another slice of pie or not? Should we hit the snooze button on our alarm clocks or get up now? And then how many courses do you take and so on. The term we use in economics for the additional piece of pie, the extra few minutes of sleep or the fifth course, is marginal. Marginal means additional, one more or one less. So economic thinking is marginal thinking. We generally make decisions at the margin, whether or not we are aware of doing so, by comparing the benefits and opportunity costs of doing a little more or a little less of something. Economics focuses on those marginal benefits and marginal costs. For example, the marginal benefit of the extra pie is the pleasure of eating it, and the marginal cost is the value of staying slimmer and not feeling stuffed. The marginal benefit of the extra sleep is that sweet added rest, and the marginal cost is the value of getting going on the day promptly. The marginal benefit of taking a fifth course is more learning and additional credits toward a degree. Its marginal cost is the value of studying for other courses, working, sleeping, or socializing that the student could do otherwise. So, why is water necessary for life itself so inexpensive, whereas diamonds, used mostly for decoration, are so expensive? And the reason that happens is because we value not all of a good that exists at one time, but rather a little more or a little less of whatever it is that we already have. People do value water on the whole more than they value diamonds on the whole. But given that water is plentiful, how much is a person willing to pay for an additional gallon? Not much. Given that diamonds are rare, how much is a person willing to pay for an additional marginal diamond? A great deal. So even though the total value of all water to mankind is almost infinitely high, whereas the total value of all diamonds is much lower, but at the margins on which we find ourselves with abundant water and few diamonds, the marginal value of diamonds exceeds the marginal value of water. So good economic thinking distinguishes marginal costs and benefits from total or average cost and benefits. Because if things just continue going on as they did, you're not adding to the margins or taking away from the margins. Things just stay the same, which doesn't require thinking at all. It just requires chugging forward. And then the example is someone manipulatively choosing to say, okay, how much is 3 hours of a relationship worth? Like if you're in a relationship with somebody, or you can go and study for a final exam, for example. Is 3 hours of studying as opposed to having a date worth throwing away an entire relationship? Hopefully not, unless you're a manipulative jerk. So,
or your significant other.
Yeah, or your significant other is a manipulative jerk. But the idea of marginal thinking would be like, okay, I would, if it were a question of throwing away my grade or throwing away my relationship, I would sooner throw away my grade, for example. Let's say if we prioritize our significant other. But in terms of the value of these next 3 hours are more valuable to me spent on my studies as opposed to going out for a movie with you, however much I may want to do that. So marginal thinking allows us to make better decisions about what to do with our time and scarce resources than absolute thinking in many regards, because in absolute thinking, the thinking has already been done in the past. So we think about every little bit, which is actually where supply and demand curves and things like that come from, which we will wind up discussing later. Oh, it says we've already gone kind of through the introduction.
Yep.
So, would you care to start reading on PDF page 30 or book page 24?
Sure, we'll just pull that up.
Yeah, it starts, here's a tricky question. I'll just start reading and then you can chime in when you're...
Okay.
Here's a tricky question to clarify the difference between marginal and average. Suppose the total cost to Southwest Airlines of a flight from Baltimore to Providence, Rhode Island is about $5,000. A little more or less, depending on fuel consumption and the numbers of sodas and snacks consumed. Suppose the aircraft carries 100 passengers, but this particular flight is not full. Suppose you come running up to the ticket counter shortly before departure time and ask to get aboard. What's the minimum price at which Southwest Airlines can benefit from selling you a ticket? You might reason this way. If the total cost of the flight is $5,000 and the plane holds 100 passengers, then the average cost per passenger for a full flight would be $50. At any price below $50, Southwest could not cover its average cost. It would necessarily lose money on the flight. Therefore, they should charge at least $50. This would not be good economic thinking, because it focuses on the average cost rather than the marginal cost. The plane is going to make the trip already.
Yep.
The other passengers have paid for their tickets. The total they have paid may be more or less than $5,000, but that does not matter at this point either, any more than the average cost matters. How much would the airline need to charge you now at the last minute in order to benefit? So think at the margin. What's the marginal cost?
Well, I would say for them, the marginal cost is almost zero. It's going to basically, it's happening anyway, and adding the extra weight is completely negligible as a fraction of the whole weight of the airplane and all that stuff. It's negligible.
So we said basically $1 worth of fuel.
But what they're gauging, for sure, if you come last minute, they're going to gauge what the marginal value is for you. So what is the value for you coming last minute to get that plane, right? So I'd say they could pitch a really high price, or a higher price than the average ticket, even though for them it's a lower value.
Maybe. We'll see.
But yeah,
we'll see.
But I would say, I'd go on to predict that airlines are not they're not unhappy about last minute customers who are willing to pay just because it's sort of...
Yeah, that has to do with making deals. But what is their marginal cost? That's what we're asking. What is their marginal cost? So call it $1 worth of fuel, and then the soda you would drink and the little bag of pretzels and peanuts you would eat. So Southwest buys them in bulk.
Yeah,
Not much is in the way of resources and is needed to produce them, so call it another $1. So if you have $1 for fuel, $1 for pretzels and pop, then if the airline charges you $3, that exceeds the marginal cost of $2, and they technically should make that deal.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that they necessarily need to price it, because, you know, you said they may have weighty reasons for sticking to posted prices in order to head off strategic behavior by clever passengers trying to get a seat for less than they would be willing to pay. But as an example to illustrate the difference between marginal costs and benefits and average cost and benefits. On that one flight, at least, Southwest could benefit $1 by selling you a $3 ticket. But if they did have a policy of selling empty seats at the last minute for any price that exceeded its estimated marginal cost of $2, well, the price wouldn't likely turn out to be $2, because then there would be a bunch of people bidding for it.
Yeah.
You get a whole crowd of people. It's like, okay, there's 2 seats and 8 bidders. How much is it going to cost? 70? 90? Well, if it's worth 70 to you and 90 to me, you'll bid up to 70, and I would get the ticket for somewhere between 70 and 90.
Yeah, makes sense. I like the distinction between average value and marginal value, or marginal cost and average cost. I think that's really important. I think it's a really common, I mean, I can't think of examples off the top, but a common fallacy to not be thinking of the margins. I guess it might not be super intuitive at first, just because it's easy to gloss over it without realizing.
Well, that also helps us deal with things like sunk costs, which means that if you've already invested in something, and then you think that this whole thing's going down the tubes, well, do you keep on throwing good money after bad money just because you want to go and increase the whole value of something to a big amount, or do you just realize that, okay, we're at this particular margin here. If I continue to do another thing, if I throw $1 at it, 90 cents of it is going down the toilet. Well, then why in the world would I do that? It makes no sense to throw another $1 if 90 cents is going to go down the toilet. But if I go and I do something else that would be very small, but let's say I throw $1 at something and then I wind up getting $1.20 back, well, that's something worth throwing $1 at.
And then throwing more dollars at until what comes back is less than $1.
Yeah. Or, well, it depends on if you can find better returns. But either way, would you care to start us up with the rule of rational life?
What page is this on? Because I think our pages are slightly different for some reason.
Well, PDF page 32, but the actual book page 26.
Okay, yeah. So let me go to actual book.
Yeah, actual book page of 26. The rule of rational life. Okay,
good. The rule of rational life. A handy way to remember what it means to think at the margin is what my former colleague Jerry German, I guess, called the rule of rational life. As long as marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost, do it. That applies to the second piece of pie, the extra sleep, the additional course, the time studying for a microeconomics final, letting people get on a flight to Providence, and bidding to get on that flight. You'll find that it applies to every decision you ever make, as long as you think clearly about the relevant margins and the costs and benefits involved. You want me to continue on to nuances of marginal?
Well, could you maybe explain then the rule of rational life in your own words, and if you can think of any examples, that'd be kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, let's think. I'm trying to think of a better example than higher education, but no, it's a good example. I'll stick with that. So if you find that, and I'm assuming there, and I'm going to make this assumption that the marginal benefit, this is at least a partially subjective matter to you, but can be decreased in subjectivity the more literal boundary conditions and etc. that you can consider. So if you just say, oh, it feels really good to go smoke crack and it's worth any amount of money I do, like, that's obviously not very good marginal thinking. Now it might be under the guise of marginal thinking, but if you consider the actual situation, it's not. So
Exactly. Okay, that's a good example.
So it's really important. It's really easy to fool yourself into thinking, I'd say, that you're doing marginal thought, but I think it's important to try to be as objective as possible. And money is a good way. It's easy to see money as objective, more value than less value, but you can still stray off that and get value from that, because value is subjective, etc. So for higher education, for some people, so let's say you're going into a STEM field like engineering, the amount of time the opportunity cost of going to college and not, working, either going to trade school and getting out quicker, or just working a job that you're able to get that has a decent salary. The opportunity cost is often less than the overall cost when seen on a timeline. Like, okay, and maybe it outweighs it 6 years, maybe 5 years after college, it's still not worth it. But then once it hits that 10-year plus whatever, maybe it's worth it for a major like engineering or something. On the other hand, when you look into and this is important when evaluating what degree to do and what to do, it's especially important with a decision like college. If you're a gender studies major, or art history major, or even a history major or something, like, just let's say the humanities. I think anyone can admit that on average, going into a STEM field or a highly skilled field like law or medicine is more valuable than, at least objectively, if we're just talking about money, because we can't factor in everyone's broad opinions. That's impossible. Is objectively more valuable. Now, for some people, maybe they just love it so much. Maybe they get a hard on when they see the Mona Lisa, or they just love talking, like they really like it. So maybe to them it's worth it, but in the end, it might not be monetarily worth it.
Well, if it's not monetarily worth it, then where does that leave you?
It leaves you basically judging it leaves you basically gauging your actions and asking, like, literally, was it worth it? Like, yes, I lost out on money, but was the experience worth it? And that's maybe some people would go along this line of thought, but I would stray away. Personally, I would stray away from that and say, okay, what value am I getting out of this objectively, as far as my future comfort, ability to make more decisions, and the scope of the decisions I'm making, whether, like, as far as, should I be buying a new house because I got this job, because I went to into something that the marginal cost does not outweigh the benefit, should I be deciding, maybe the decision in the future that you'll be making after this cost, because it is sort of an cumulative thing, is, what house should I buy, rather than how many food stamps should I spend a day. So this is it's really important, and it's definitely I would say wise to be looking at the monetary value, because as we've discussed in past streams, money sort of, it was in the parlor, but money is debt, right? So it gives you power to get stuff that you want, and in the end, an experience that you may have. I really like learning about this stuff. If you really enjoy that and you have to go to college for it, it would probably behoove you to get a different degree that is very valuable and objectively valuable to society and valued more in that way, and then later come back once you are comfortable, and then that decision isn't as big for you, because I already have tons of money in the bank, so I'm just doing this for fun. Or audit courses. You don't even have to be a student. That's probably but anyway, that's sort of sidetracking. So yeah, I mean, as far as making decisions on the margin, try to be as objective and just try to be as objective as possible. It's, of course, not, it's sort of a thing humans we'll struggle. Like, I don't think we can do it in complete say like a physics problem, like in a vacuum. We can't make perfectly objective decisions, but we can approach objectivity and in making marginal decisions, it's just definitely pertinent to do so.
Oh yeah.
So.
Now we can talk a bit about the nuances of marginal, and basically that we're referring to meaning of marginal here. Here in the book it says, before finishing with a rather painful illustration of why marginal cost and benefits matter more to decision making than average or total cost and benefits, let's consider an important nuance to the meaning of marginal. In much of the thinking we do about the economy, it's helpful to think about the marginal units of something or other as being identical to all the other units. We imagine, for example, the second piece of pie we have for dessert might be identical to the first, and an additional 10 minutes of sleep is just as restful as the 10 minutes before. The fifth course we might take in a term is just as valuable as the fourth, and so on. Thought about that way, marginal means strictly additional. And each additional unit is identical to the one before, but marginal has another sense in which additional units actually aren't as good. Like taking for example, monetarily, perhaps paying for an SJW course on top of an engineering course might not be, they might not marginally be equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
Or they might not be equivalent.
I want to add something to what I said previously, because I think I could have tightened up to what I said.
Okay, can you hold that thought until I finish this paragraph?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I for some reason, keep going.
But marginal has another sense in which additional units are actually not as good. The marginal 10 minutes of sleep we get after hitting our alarm clock snooze button are generally not as satisfying as those before because of guilt over not getting up and dreading the next alarm. Similarly, marginal hours of studying late at night are often not as valuable as we tire and lose concentration. Students enroll in the courses they value most first, so a marginal fifth course is unlikely to be as valuable in the student's subjective judgment as the first four. When a farmer decides to put additional acres into cultivation in a season, those marginal acres will be on the parts of his farm with less fertile soil, some drainage problems, or other drawbacks. Hence, the word marginal also has the sense of being not quite up to par, or not as desirable. What were you saying?
So when being as objective as possible, you still have to keep your values in consideration. And ideally, your values, not your whims. So, for an example of someone I know, Caleb, he went to college and then decided, okay, screw this. He wanted to be a professor, or was at least planning to be a professor initially. And then he's like, it basically is antithetical to my values, and I don't want to basically deal with that shit. I don't want to, basically constrain my free speech and tote a certain ideology that's basically favored and stuff like that. And while maybe being a professor would end up in maybe getting a degree and being a professor would end up with elevated monetary benefits, but besides other than working a job, since it crossed values, it's important to not make that decision. Because money is not the ultimate goal, right? You should do things in accordance with your values while considering your well-being, because money helps facilitate your interaction with the world. And
yes,
and if you have not enough money, then it might be pertinent, but if it crosses your values in a way that you find egregious, don't make that go ahead and don't go through with it. Yeah. That's still completely warranted.
And then if you're talking about marginal utility of something, right? Jobs are only valuable up to a certain point in terms of the monetary benefit. What is the marginal utility of an extra $1,000 if you're already making $200,000?
Bill Gates all money is marginally money is worthless to him.
Yes, his time is worth way more than his money, and ultimately he can choose to spend his time based on the things that he values. But I would say that, after you get a comfortable income, after you get all your needs met, and then maybe a few wants, I'm not going to say that everyone needs to stop and say that's enough income for anybody. That's just stupid of me. But if someone were to get to that particular point of having all their needs met and decide, hey, it would be more satisfying for me to do this with my extra time than it would be to earn an extra dollar, well, you've just gone and decided that other activity is worth more to you than that dollar.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Or than that 1,000 or whatever it may be. And if you're, putting something up on Patreon and asking for donations or something and trying to establish a different career path, so to speak, in doing what you want, all the while still, producing enough value in the world in order to be able to get what you need, that's also entirely a viable option.
Exactly.
It just has to do with looking at the value of all the different things on the margin and how am I going to spend this extra hour? How am I going to spend this extra time? What am I going to do with it? And then you have to do the calculation and figure out ultimately the answer to the question, is it worth it? And one example given in the chapter is it worth it to get off welfare?
Right, yeah. Perfect example.
Example, the welfare trap. And this is well, I'm not going to say anything about a moral judgment on this matter. I'm simply going to say we'll
leave that up to the viewers.
Well, let's yeah. We got about 2 pages of text and then a chart, which I will or 2.5 pages of text and then a chart. I'll read this page 28 or page 34 of the PDF, and then you can continue. Because most of our decisions are made on margins of one kind or another, we respond to incentives at the margin rather than on the whole or on average. A painful illustration of this fact is what is called the welfare trap, the way in which marginal changes in earned income affect changes in disposable income for families on welfare. As a poor mother of 2, say, earns more through working at a job, she gradually loses eligibility for welfare benefits, such as temporary assistance for needy families, a cash benefit, food stamps, housing assistance, and the like. Economists use the slightly misleading term marginal tax rate to refer to the proportion of additional earnings a person loses, either through increased taxes or lost welfare benefits. It's misleading because lost benefits are not taxes paid. Nevertheless, that is the term used. Would you continue, Stephen?
Oh, sure. Go to it. That was term used. The devilish problem is that the marginal tax rates that low-income earners face through the phasing out of benefits and increased taxes can give them a strong disincentive to earn more, even though the average tax rate they pay does not seem to be much of a disincentive to work. The following illustration comes from Modeling Potential Income and Welfare Assistance Benefits in Illinois, a report published by Illinois Policy Institute in 2014. Let's start the example with this question. Would a poor mother of 2 have an incentive to take a job offering $15 an hour or $31,200 a year before taxes if she could also bring home an additional $29,500 in government assistance after taxes for a total annual income of $30,700?
$60,700.
Oh yeah, $60,000. My bad. $60,700. I assume that most would say yes. That's a good deal. But we were thinking about totals when we asked the question that way, not the marginal changes. Such a person would almost never face a choice between not working at all and working at $15 an hour. She would more likely face a choice about whether or not to take the step up the job ladder going to that $15 an hour from, say, $12 an hour. As she gets more training and takes on additional responsibility at the margin, how strong is her incentive to do that? Table 3.1 shows how a low-income working Chicagoan's take-home income would change with incremental changes in his or her earned income, starting from the current Chicago minimum wage rate at $8.25 an hour. Note that if a mother of such as we are considering were currently earning $12 an hour and receiving the government benefits to which she is entitled, taking the raise to $15 an hour and thereby increasing her earned income to $6,240 a year, would mean decreasing her take-home income by $2,896 a year. Her gain in earned income would be more than offset by her loss in government assistance. That's a marginal tax rate of over 100%. Thinking at the margin, does she have an incentive to take that $3 an hour raise or to refuse it? Although it is dreadful to contemplate, note that the problem is worst in the Chicago case, not for a raise from 15 an hour to 18 an hour, where the marginal tax rate is over 340%. And note that not until she was earning $38 an hour would a mother take home more than she was taking home when she was earning minimum wage. Just think about those marginal tax rates due to the incentives of poor people to work their way out of poverty. It is not surprising that so many people get trapped in welfare. In fact, to me, it's impressive. It makes me proud of the human race that despite those awful incentives at the margin, so many people do climb up the job ladder, bear the losses of disposable income, and raise themselves out of poverty.
So people, ultimately, he's looking at the ability for people to transcend that marginal thinking and think long-term. Or rather transcend temporary marginal thinking and think long-term marginal thinking. What's actually going to happen after all is said and done. Not just what happens next month. Because if one continues to improve one's performance and one continues to work their way up the job ladder, well, then the situation after 5 years might be very different. So that would be viewed as an investment of sorts, of a deferral of extra income now for extra income later.
Yeah. Exactly. And the thing is, not everyone can predict that they will end up eventually bridging that gap, right? And in getting to where they don't need the welfare and they're still making more money. So for some, especially ones who have, especially for people with families and kids to feed and stuff like that, where that takes ultimate precedence, it would make complete sense for them to not try to climb that ladder, because it's that ladder is on a huge cliff and it's shaking and all whatever. It's whatever that stupid analogy was, just it's dangerous and it's sometimes a matter of life and death, etc. Essentially.
Yeah, which is I would say one of the biggest flaws in the welfare system is that that inherent in its design is captivity.
Yeah, you have a strong incentive to not leave it.
And I will yeah, it's
I mean, imagine imagine being in an oasis in a desert, and you have all your have your basic needs covered for. Although you're still limited because you only have that little area to roam around in, but you have food and water there, and you can subsist, right? It's limited, but you can make it. And do you make the decision to traverse across the desert and get to a civilization, say, and where you'll have much more freedom and you'll have the ability to get what you want, etc. You'll have all the benefits of the oasis, but more and more freedom and stuff like that. Do you make the decision how do you gauge if you can make that trip without dying of thirst, for example? So yeah.
And how you weigh that is that's the marginal benefit of taking a day's journey into the desert or taking a week's journey into the desert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You could do it very, very simply of probability of success times value of success and probability of failure times value of failure and so on, and then averaging it all out versus probability or essentially what you have.
Yeah.
Which means that's actually a measure of utility. What is the projected utility to you of the decision that you're making? And interestingly, when talking about welfare, the decisions of the people in charge largely largely affect these other decisions, right? Because in determining what kinds of welfare benefits people get, you are in essence creating the framework for them to make the decisions that run their life, which means that you are making a large portion of their decisions, or rather slanting the playing field one way or another. And at least currently, the way the welfare system works, it's slanting the playing field in the direction of preventing upward social mobility.
Yeah.
And that's why all these caring attempts at trying to fix the situation by actually ameliorating temporary circumstances, as opposed to trying to get the trajectory to go in the right direction, can be destructive. People will say, well, you don't care about the poor people, that you don't give them enough. Well, what if you give them so much that them actually doing something takes them down? What happens if the whole point of the that currently exists, and I'm not going to argue whether it should exist or not right now, but that you would not want to have something that disincentivizes upward mobility. At least I would think that you wouldn't want to have that unless you had ulterior evil motives.
Yeah.
And now, if we believe such libertarian speakers as Yuri Maltsev, basically says that if you are in government and you do something with an evil consequence, likely you had an evil motive and you're just going to try to hide it. Whereas if you're a voter, you may not have an evil motive because you haven't taken the time to think about things to their end consequence, necessarily speaking.
Oh yeah.
So that's a pretty bleak outlook on the situation, but nevertheless one that might need to be thought about. It's like, is this the way it works? How does this whole thing all play out?
And do people profit from more welfare the more kids they have?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so that's another part of the trap too.
Yes.
And that's really bad. That's especially bad. Like the way it works that way. I'm not that they're giving benefits to people with more kids, but that they almost incentivize having kids when you don't have the means to handle them, just so you can dip into that welfare zone.
Well, yeah, and that's what lots of people do.
And what do you think the effect of that is on those kids? Do you think they have a great time? It's bad. Like, that's bad.
It's bad for everybody.
Yeah.
You're incentivizing. I mean, effectively, what is that but like a 9-month delay, a 9-month delayed payment for prostitution with a caveat?
Yeah.
I mean, if you phrase it that way, it sounds really, really gross and nasty. But the fact of the matter is, that's what all these different things wind up doing. If you insert all these artificial incentives, then you can wind up having people doing things that would otherwise be immediately perceived as bad, due to the fact that money's going to fall from the sky if I do this.
Yep. It's pretty awful system, huh? Well, shit.
So yeah, talking about economics tends to, at least I found, tends to do one of two things. It either scares the living daylights out of people, or it causes them to very quickly think about, okay, how can we actually be compassionate? How can we work within the confines of what actually does work, and determine well, first off, most importantly, the the personal policies, what it is that we do in our own lives. And then think about, okay, well, what is it that, what is the actual role of the government here? What is the actual role of the citizen here? All those questions are very, very important to answer, and it's very important that before jumping to conclusions that are likely going to be of a very emotional nature, that we have all the facts, that we make educated decisions regarding money and resources, rather than impulsive ones, because impulsive decision making is the kind that ultimately winds up leading us down a often irreversible, insofar as bankruptcy isn't an option, economic hole. And if bankruptcy is an option, that just means that we're causing a net loss in value both to others and to ourselves. To others in the present and to ourselves in the future. Because there's often a 7-year statutory period where you can't apply for loans, you can't do much of anything, and your credit history is going to be abysmal if you go bankrupt. Now, some people have done it, and some people have climbed out of it.
But it's not easy.
Oh, certainly not.
The odds are against you.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. On a more positive note, seeing as our 3 hours are up, always focus on producing more than you consume. And that, in the long term, as long as you have the right to your own property, is going to work out. Yep. The expected outcome of that is always going to be positive.
Oh yeah. For sure.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for doing this whole streaming thing. This felt like it went really, really fast. Like, I could go for another hour.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But, it's a 3-hour stream, and now the 3 hours are up, so... Time to say goodbye. Da da da. All right.
Oh my god.
See you guys. Thank you all for your participation. Bye.